Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Light, there's some U.S. oil companies that are still operating in Russia despite pledges to wind down their operations. National Oil Well Varco, which is a U.S. company based in Houston, has oil field services in Russia, still even after announcing in a press release a year ago that it was, and this is a quote, actively examining our alternatives, including the potential to further curtail our activities. In March of last year, 2022, Schlumberger announced that it would, another quote, immediately suspend new investments in technology deployment to our Russian operations. But just 7 months later, Schlumberger, still in Russia, was caught distributing military draft notices to 9,000 of its Russian employees to supply forces to Putin's mass mobilization effort. So, Mr. Light, for some of these companies, it sounds just like business as usual in Russia. In May, I wrote a letter to Secretary Granholm and Secretary Yellen asking them to evaluate oil companies that are still operating in Russia. So could the department please take a closer look into this and provide me with a report on the operating status of U.S. oil companies still in Russia? And things specifically like this. I mean, I just find this, just very concerning that a company that is based in London, that trades on the New York Stock Exchange, that is assisting Vladimir Putin in getting his draft notices to his citizens. That's just unacceptable. So I'd appreciate you looking into this.
I'm happy to take that on, sir. And even though it is Treasury and Commerce who enforce those sanctions and compliance, I am very happy to work with you and your staff, schedule a briefing as soon as possible to talk about the Russian sanctions, their impact on the industry, and what we know and what we need to know in order to address this problem moving forward. So we'd welcome that conversation.
Yeah, I think these companies should have had plenty of time to wind down operations by now, and shouldn't be, assisting in Russia's war in Ukraine. So, Ms. Jurgensen, as you know, oil revenue is how Putin finances this illegal invasion, and in December, the West capped the price of Russian oil at $60 a barrel, well below the global market price of $85. It appears that the cap is having the intended effect of depressing revenue without directly cutting the global supply. The Kremlin's income from oil and gas is the lowest that it's been since the beginning of this pandemic. Some analysts estimate that Russia only earned $5 billion from fossil fuels in January, which is about half in January of the previous year. So on Friday, this past Friday, Russia announced it was cutting crude oil production by 500,000 barrels per day, which is about 5% of the country's output. And the propagandists there say that the cuts are retaliation for the oil price caps, but I think it's worth noting that Russia's decision came days after it endorsed the OPEC Plus plan. So, Ms. Jorgensen, how would you describe the effectiveness of these price caps, and could they eventually diminish Russia's ability to invest in future production?
Thank you, Senator. So far as your question indicates, we have seen quite a significant effect of the price cap. I think it's important to note that the price cap comes on top of what was already a full embargo on oil and coal exports, small exception for some pipeline oil for reasons of security of supply for a couple of member states, but really 90% of our oil imports was already under a full ban. We have banned investments into the energy sector in Russia, and we have banned exports of any technology that is necessary for extraction or LNG. So the price cap comes on top when these very significant sanctions are already in place.
And are our allies complying with this, fully complying with this cap?
So far, the results are good, both in terms of reducing the profits for Russia in this sector, but also in terms of ensuring compliance. This measure put together jointly with partners, including the United States, seemed to be effective. We have, within the European Union, appointed an official to be responsible, including for relations with international partners, to ensure that there is compliance with the sanctions. So I think so far so good, but we, of course, continue to monitor very, very closely.
What would happen if we changed the cap to $50 or $40?
It is possible within the cap, within the measure we have taken to reduce downwards. So we'll see over time how the markets develop and what's the most effective way of approaching it. So I think we have so far, as I said, put in place 9 sanctions packages. We've presented a 10th, and we will be ready to do what is necessary.
Yeah, I think that's worth looking into. Thank you. Fisher's questions about the aid we've given to Ukraine. As you know, the United States, in this close partnership with Ukraine, we provided, I think the number to date is $29.8 billion in security assistance since this brutal attack occurred around a year ago. Equipment from the United States has included everything from ammunition, grenades, bombs, NVDs, HIMARS, 155 millimeter artillery pieces, fire radars, much of what's in our inventory. Not everything, but much. And I also want to commend our allies for their support. Nearly 50 countries providing $13 billion in security assistance, most recently agreeing to provide tanks. And this is going to be critical for Ukraine with the approach that they're going to need to take this spring. So General Kellogg, can you provide your assessment on the effectiveness of both U.S. and partner military equipment? If you see any gaps, if there's something you think is not working well and something that we should address, a gap in capability, I'd like to hear that. And then from a combat assessment, what has provided the greatest return on investment for the Ukrainians? And what do you think the most important thing for us to continue to supply? If you have a sense for, what I heard when I was in Munich a couple of weeks ago was that they need 155 millimeter artillery shells, that supply is going down. They also made some other requests, some of which we're going to deal with here in the United States Senate. But if you could share your assessment, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, what you really need is all the equipment you just mentioned, but more. We developed a package during the Cold War called Assault Breaker. Assault Breaker were the Abrams tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicle, the Paladin 155 self-propelled howitzer, the Apache fighting system. All of those systems together allowed us to fight in a combined arms fashion. A combined arms fashion assault will break the Russians' back. The Russians are not capable of handling that. But we haven't given them the full suite. We haven't given the Ukrainians ATACMS. That's the long-range missile that fits into the pod of either a HIMARS or the MLRS system out there. It gives you extended range of 200 miles. It's GPS guided. It can attack their supply lines deep. We've only given them 31 tanks. 31 tanks is a battalion. Mm-hmm. You need much more than that. Give them brigade levels so they can actually fight combined arms. And then maybe you have to do it separately. You give the Europeans with the Challenger tanks from Britain, maybe they have one unit.
My sense is, in discussing with, our highest military leadership, including, folks on the Joint Chiefs, that they are capable of using combined arms to fight. I think what you might be alluding to is they need to do it at a bigger scale.
Correct, Senator.
Certainly there are gaps. I mean, they're not using, nor do they have Apache helicopters. That would be another issue. But being able to combine ground troops with, artillery, with long-range fires is something I think they've done rather effectively, maybe not at the scale that you think.
Not at the scale that is needed to win.
So give me a sense of what you feel the greatest return on our investment has been from the standpoint of equipment that we have provided them.
I would believe the best system that we have given them is the HIMARS system. That is the one that has given deep fires and the fires that have been able to compensate and overcompensate for the Russian fires. So if you have to pick, artillery generally, even I'm an old infantryman, artillery will win your fights. And we need to give them as much artillery to dominate that. Plus one other system that is not really a military hardware system in the sense it's kinetic, but we need to give them more advanced intelligence systems that is able to use jammers, because the Russians are using jammers to great effect right now, especially against the drones the Ukrainians have had. It's something we haven't really done. We probably should do more.
All right, I appreciate that. Just if I could just take another 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman. The HIMARS they view as it was a game changer for them, and I agree. That is, a good example of a weapon system that has been very effective and really, changed the momentum in this fight. Beyond that, what would be the next thing you think would be a game changer for them?
Well, again, sir, what I just talked about, it's not a kinetic system, but the ability to do the anti-jamming in the intelligence type of collection and electronic warfare. The Russians do that very, very well, and that's causing problems with the drones of the Ukrainians as well. It's also able to target the Ukrainians much deeper. It's something that is really not thought about because it may not be sexy, but the fact is those are the kind of systems they need to support. It allows better targeting, longer range targeting, and with greater effects on the battlefield.
Right. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Cotton, please.
Agree more with the senator from Iowa, on this, the, opportunity to serve. And as you mentioned, General, some of it, just somebody talking about it later. My dad served in the 82nd Airborne, and I would hear it from him all the time. And one of the reasons, I took my path not in the Army, but in the Navy. Also, I want to share my condolences and on yours and, Madam Secretary, for you too, and the Army's loss. We often expect losses in combat. Training accidents are, especially mid-airs, are just horrific, and so we are with you in sharing the grief over this. General, you talked a little bit about training opportunities. I want to talk about a place specific to Arizona, because for the last several years we've been hearing from witnesses as we prepare for this pacing threat of China, that we need to be doing everything we can to prepare for this fight that we obviously don't want to get in. And the best way we can, in my opinion, that we can avoid staying out of a fight is to make sure that our adversaries understand that they're not going to win. And that means being as prepared as possible. Electronic warfare is something we've talked about a lot lately. It's a critical mission. I'm really pleased to see that DoD has taken a fresh look at our capability here, because it's going to be part, and a big part, of a potential future fight, especially if it's in the Western Pacific. So I've been looking at this issue closely, and I know some of my colleagues on the committee have as well. But we need expanded airspace. The stick is longer than it used to be. We need more space. The threat is more significant, and we need to be able to replicate the high-end threat and have areas where we can put emitters and have the dynamic opportunities to best equip their forces and train them. DoD has had officials out to see the electronic proving ground at Fort Huachuca in Arizona, and folks agree that this place has the capacity, and it also has the expertise, and they are willing to do more. So, General, can you please talk to the Army's vision and strategy for ensuring that our military is prepared for the advanced electronic warfare threats that we will face in the future?
Yes, Senator, you make a great point about Fort Huachuca. There's a reason why we have the unmanned aerial system training out there. There's a reason why we have the electronic warfare capability at areas like that. It takes special places. You certainly got to have the size, but it's also where you can do it. We do a lot of this stuff at the National Training Center. We do it out at Fort Huachuca, but it's something that's going to be more important in the future. We got to train the way we're going to fight. We got to expose our commanders to that environment, and our intent is that our training centers are so rigorous that when they actually go into combat, it's an easier day.
Yeah, that's what you want, right? You want the the training to be the most challenging thing.
That's right.
Not often the case. Fort Huachuca also offers geography and a landscape that really doesn't exist anywhere else, this natural bowl where you can transmit on a lot of different frequencies at very high energy. This is a real opportunity and it's got a lot of potential to help the Air Force with their F-35s. That not every, but a lot of their training missions, they need to be considering the high-end threats. We can put emitters at Fort Huachuca. We also have opportunities to extend the size of the Barry Goldwater range and maybe connect it to a MOA, the Jackal MOA, I think that's north of Fort Huachuca. So in my remaining time, I'm going to have another question for the record on the Fort Huachuca range, but I've got about 30 seconds, and I really don't want to go over. Madam Secretary, I'm going to submit another question for the record about your vision for human-machine teaming and working together. That offers a lot of opportunities for us in future conflicts. Thank you, and I will yield back my 8 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. I appreciate that very much. Senator Scott, please.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. Thank each of you for being here. Thank you for what you do.
Everyone can see members have been coming in and out of committee, eagerly trying to time their opportunity to pose questions to our witnesses. I'll recognize Senator Kelly if he's ready, or if he needs a minute.
Ready to go.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. And Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing on this important topic. Certainly for Arizona, in California and the West, we are facing serious challenges with drought and climate change, and our access to renewable or reliable supplies of water and water affordability is directly related to these challenges. And as sources of water become more scarce, the price is clearly going to go up. For example, I live in Tucson, Arizona, where the average water bill increased by 118% between 2010 and 2018. In some cases, these increasing water rates can drive more conservation. I've been told it's the one thing that actually works well. But increasing water bills also have a significant impact on households who are living paycheck to paycheck. Folks are really struggling with this. So, Ms. Menard, I understand that your community has faced water supply challenges due to drought. How does the city of Santa Cruz balance the challenges of needing to increase rates as water supply costs increase with the need to ensure that water remains affordable to your residents?
Thank you for that question, Senator Kelly. I think the really important thing that we've done in Santa Cruz is acknowledge once we initiated our major capital reinvestment cycle, including sort of the infrastructure side as well as the supply side, that we were potentially going to be negatively impacting some of our folks in our community, or at least able to pay. And so one of the things that we've done is we have really studied that problem and gone into detail to try to understand not just what's occurring, but what will occur as we continue to make these really necessary reinvestments in systems and facilities and supply. I think another thing we've done is we've recently completed an advanced metering infrastructure implementation in our community that has allowed us to help people, particularly focused on low-income customers, look at and be notified immediately when they start having a leak so that we can assist them with getting that leak repaired. We've redirected our conservation programs. Santa Cruz has a very strong ethic for water conservation, and our customers' indoor and outdoor use, it averages about 44 gallons per person per day, which is probably the lowest or near the lowest in the state and maybe lots of other places. But one of the results of that is that we have been able to redirect some of our resources internally to supporting this advanced metering infrastructure initiative to communicate to customers immediately when a leak is occurring so that they can get that fixed. We're looking at opportunities to support helping people get those leaks fixed and dealing with the fact that in rentals, for example, if the tenant is responsible for the bill, that and then it's not incentivized for the owner to actually pay to fix the leaks. We've been working on some ways to deal with that as well.
I recently added one of those to the water meter in my house that'll detect and give you a lot of data on water usage. So thank you. And Mr. Jones, one way that we can address rising rates for those who have difficulty making ends meet is through some federal water assistance programs, and that's why I supported the creation of a water assistance pilot program for rural and low-income communities in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So my remaining time here, Mr. Jones, can you speak to how water affordability assistance programs can help to ensure increasing water rates do not push families into poverty or cause them to lose access to drinking water?
Yeah, I think the situation we have right now, and thank you for that, in California and across the country is that with water rates ever increasing, that folks are continuing to face shutoffs and losing access to water entirely without assistance. And all we have so far established on the federal level is the Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program, LIWAP, which is addressing debt and only addressing debt, at least in California, one time. And that could be a big challenge because if you want to, going through the journey of what it takes for a customer, a family, to go through the process of having to choose between paying their water bill to avoid shutoff or maybe, not paying rent or not paying for as much food. That is...
Meeting your family, and congratulations on your nomination. And I really appreciate the conversation we had, I think it was about a month ago, about the importance of leveraging existing Army assets to strengthen our electronic warfare capabilities, and hearing your perspective on how critical our Army's training ranges are to that work and that effort. The Fort Huachuca Electronic Proving Ground offers great potential for electronic warfare testing, experimentation, and training. And Fort Huachuca, as we discussed, has a truly unique geography that allows us to safely employ electronic warfare effects and to train very realistically. And a DoD team recently came out to the fort and assessed their capability and found that it does have the capacity and the expertise and the will also to do more. And in my view, we need to seize this opportunity. That's why I led a provision in this year's defense bill requiring that the Secretary of Defense carry out a demonstration of a new Western Range complex. This will eventually serve as a joint, multi-domain, non-kinetic testing and training environment across military departments. And the Western Range complex would connect multiple non-kinetic ranges and training sites to better replicate some real-world threat conditions. And I also worked on provisions to require assessments on where we may need to invest to ensure that we keep pace with changing technology and threats. So General George, if confirmed, you would oversee the execution of Army policies and programs on electronic warfare. So could you explain a little bit why this capability is so important as we accelerate modernization to meet threats posed by countries like Russia and China?
Yes, Senator. This kind of gets to some of the earlier questions. We were talking about what have we learned, and a lot in electronic warfare and also in signals intelligence. That's a big part of what we can do out in Huachuca. There's very few locations like what we have, the capability that we have out at Huachuca, which is also the Army's Intel Center. And we have to immediately adapt the kind of lessons that we're learning, and we need places where we can do that. And we're looking at places just like you're talking about doing that at Huachuca. Also have to integrate that into our combat training centers. So I think it's absolutely, if we're going to evolve, we're going to have to learn how to adapt to those environments.
And one of the things that makes Fort Huachuca unique is the geography. And when you put an emitter out on the Barry Goldwater Range on the ground to emulate some Chinese threat, compared to what you can do in Fort Huachuca, you're talking about upwards of 10 times the power. And what that enables is, say it's a surface-to-air missile threat, a fighter to be able to identify that threat from a much greater distance. So could you talk a little bit about the context of what this means for a future conflict in the Pacific if we were to get into one?
Well, I think that it's what you're talking about being able to do is realistic training that we have to be able to do. Those are the kind of threats that we're going to face, and you have to train. You have to train for that. We're doing the same thing and trying to incorporate that as where we can with our exercises. Some of our exercises have actually linked back to capabilities that we've had at the electronic proving ground. So I think we have to, obviously the Pacific is the expanse, and doing geography and linking all of these capabilities to include command and control is something that we'll continue to do. But it's obviously critically important to the Army and I think the Joint Force.
Well, thank you, General. In my remaining time here, I just want to talk about a visit I had at the Army Futures Command, and I was briefed on their efforts to ensure that the U.S. Army remains at the forefront of technological innovation and warfighting capability. And they had some concerns that they didn't have a lot of nimble funding tools and sources, and they were often at risk of missing some opportunities to leverage innovation from industry because they didn't have the funding tools available to get resources to companies without it taking, in some cases, a couple years. So I know I'm running out of time here, but General, I'm interested in getting some help and a commitment to facilitate some collaboration between the Army Futures Command and the Office of Strategic Capital, and to see if you would be willing to work with me on these efforts to bridge what we often refer to as the valley of death in government contracting.
Absolutely, Senator. Whatever we can do to, I think, do things evolve quickly, we're absolutely interested in that, and I'm happy to come see you talking about that more.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Budd.
Mr. President, when Congress passed the CHIPS and Science Act last summer, we made a promise to America that these historic investments would be felt in communities across the country. More microchip manufacturing facilities, more high-paying jobs that do not require a four-year degree, lower costs, a stronger supply chain, and a stronger economy. Since the CHIPS Act became law, companies have announced plans to invest hundreds of billions of dollars to bring microchip manufacturing back to America, including in Arizona. But here's the problem. As currently implemented, when these projects receive incentives through the CHIPS Act, they are subject to a new federal review under a process called NEPA. This includes projects that have already received the necessary state and federal environmental permits and are already under construction. So factories that are being built right now in places like Phoenix could be forced to pause construction and undergo a redundant federal review. And that just doesn't work. So this week, along with my colleagues, Senators Young, Brown, and Hagerty, I introduced the Building Chips in America Act. And this bill would speed up the construction of projects supported by the CHIPS Act by streamlining federal permitting reviews and keeping in place bedrock environmental protections for clean air and clean water. To do this, the bill designates the Department of Commerce as the lead agency to carry out NEPA reviews for any CHIPS Act project. It also clarifies that certain projects, certain CHIPS projects, like those already under development with necessary permits, are not major federal actions and therefore are not subject to a NEPA review. These measures would prevent costly delays for projects. And right now, we have an opportunity to maximize the impact of the CHIPS Act for our economy and for our national security. Plans already underway that have received the necessary permits should not have to face extra hurdles. So, Mr. President, let's cut the red tape. Let's start reaping the benefits of our historic CHIPS Act. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President, on roll call vote 200.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you. On roll call vote 200, I voted nay. It was my intention to vote aye. With apologies to the staff and everybody else here late, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to change my vote since it will not affect the outcome.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, placing holds on hundreds of military promotions over a single policy disagreement is unconscionable. It's harming our national security and is going to have cascading effects for years. Not only will military services be left without confirmed leaders, but our senior leaders are going to have to do multiple jobs at once. This will disadvantage the services at every level and leave less experienced members to have to step in to fill their boss's shoes. As someone who served in the Navy for 25 years, I want to paint a picture of what that looks like in the real world. Operations plans, they will not get updated. Now, these are the plans that prepare us for military conflicts, for humanitarian disasters, and any conflict we face around the world. Operations and exercises will suffer because they lack an expert at the head of the table who can weigh strategic risks and who is empowered by Congress to make critical decisions. We won't have confirmed senior leaders at the table in places like Africa, where we are trying to strengthen ties and security cooperation with our partners to counter violent extremists and the rising influence of Russia and China. And Mr. President, speaking of China, we won't have confirmed senior leaders at critical posts in that region of the world where they are empowered to bolster our capabilities. And let's not forget, these holds are preventing the promotions of military leaders in Alabama. There are a lot of really important units who operate out of the Redstone Arsenal, including the Missile Defense Agency, which is responsible for developing U.S. defense against incoming ballistic missiles. The Missile Defense Agency's next director is one of those officers at Redstone who is waiting for his third star before he can officially assume this new role. The senator from Alabama is preventing that. Do we really want a leadership gap at the Missile Defense Agency? And lastly, I have to mention that this tactic treats our military service members and their families like political pawns. Let me tell you, this isn't just like holding up a promotion like in any other job. This blockade of military promotions, it's hurting military families who are having to put off moves to new assignments across the country or across the world. That means a military spouse cannot start a new job. It means a new school year starts without military kids who are stuck at their last base and don't know if they're going to be able to maybe try out for the sports team or join a club Now, Mr. President, I know from experience just how hard these moves are. They're hard for military families, and that's under the best of circumstances, let alone when they are stuck in the middle of this. And as our military faces recruitment challenges, this stunt, and Mr. President, this is a stunt. This stunt is making a decision easy for a military family who has supported their service members maybe for decades to finally say that they've had enough. Now, maybe they'll choose to retire instead of assume yet another unknown, brought to you by the senator from Alabama. Or maybe a junior service member, maybe that person decides not to make a career in the military because they see so much uncertainty as their bosses are treated like political pawns. And these holds are going to have cascading effects. It's going to get worse and worse. This is not just some abstract idea. Let me talk about a few of the military leaders whose promotions are being blocked. Mr. President, the President of the United States has nominated Rear Admiral Frederick Kocher to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy and the Commander of the 7th Fleet. The Commander of the 7th Fleet is not going to be able to take over as a confirmed Vice Admiral in that job. He has spent 31 years in service in 29 different duty assignments, and by the Senator of Alabama, he is being treated like a pawn. The President has also nominated Rear Admiral Douglas Perry to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy. Now, he is currently the 2nd Fleet Commander and the Joint Forces Command in Norfolk. He has spent 34 years in the United States Navy. The Senator from Alabama is treating him like a political pawn. The President has nominated Rear Admiral Yvette Davids to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy and the Superintendent of the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, she has spent 34 years in service. She was the commander of a carrier strike group, and now the Senator from Alabama is treating her like a political pawn. The President has nominated Rear Admiral Brendan McClain to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy and the Commander of the Naval Surface Forces Command. That's the Naval Surface Force in the Pacific Fleet. Now, he spent 33 years in service. Senator from Alabama is treating him like a political pawn. The President has nominated Rear Admiral David Cheever to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy and also the Commander of the Naval Air Forces in the Pacific Fleet. This is all of our air forces for the United States Navy, and I served in the Pacific Fleet, aboard an aircraft carrier. Admiral Cheever has spent 35 years in the United States Navy, was also the commander of a carrier strike group, now being treated like a political pawn. The President has nominated Vice Admiral Charles Cooper to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy and the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Central Command. Mr. President, how critical is that? 34 years of service, being treated as a political pawn. The President's nominated Robert Goucher to be a Vice Admiral in the United States Navy. He's currently the commander of the Naval Submarine Forces. All of our submarines in the Atlantic Fleet. Attack and ballistic missile subs. He spent 32 years in the United States Navy, and the Senator from Alabama is treating him like a political pawn. Same is true for Rear Admiral Shoshana Chatfield. She has been nominated to be promoted to Vice Admiral and to be the U.S. military representative to NATO, NATO's military committee. She has spent 35 years in uniform. The Senator from Alabama is treating her as a political pawn. The President has also nominated Rear Admiral James Downey to be a Vice Admiral in the U.S. Navy and Commander of the Naval Sea Systems Command. The Naval Sea Systems Command is all the engineering and development. Mr. President, you know from being a senator from Virginia how critical it is to have somebody in this post. That is confirmed by the United States Senate. The senator from Alabama is treating the admiral as a political pawn. The President has nominated Major General Roger Turner to be a lieutenant general in the United States Marine Corps and the commanding general of the 3rd MEF. Mr. President, I believe your son serves in the U.S. Marine Corps. The 3rd MEF in Japan is not going to have a confirmed general. He has spent 34 years in service. And Mr. President, finally, well, not finally, I have a few more. And by the way, there's another 100, sitting over here on the bench. President has nominated Vice Admiral William Houston to be an admiral in the United States Navy, full admiral, while serving as the Director of Naval Nuclear Propulsion. Now, this admiral is in charge of all of our nuclear reactors, and he can't get promoted after spending 33 years in the United States Navy because Senator Tuberville is treating him like a political pawn. And now, finally, Mr. President, the President of the United States nominated Major General Tony Hale to be a Lieutenant General. Now, I know Major General Hale. He's currently serving as the Commanding General and Commandant, or the Commanding General of Fort Huachuca in my state of Arizona. He has spent 29 years in uniform. He's been in 18 different duty assignments, 6 in support of combat operations. And the senator from Alabama is treating Major General Tony Hale as his political pawn. Mr. President, I've been here for 2.5 years. There's not something I've felt more strongly about than this. And I don't think the senator from Alabama gets it. I mean, this blockade of military promotions is doing real damage to our national security right now. It's doing great harm to military families. It's going to have cascading effects for years. And every single day that this continues, the consequences of this get more severe. So I urge my Senate colleague from Alabama to remove his hold on these nominations so that the Senate can perform its constitutional duty and enable our military readiness and our national security. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Direct ascent ASATs and laser capabilities, we've seen them testing.
Thank you. Thank you, and good luck to both of you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Tuberville had some good questions for the two generals. Let me point out, though, that both General Whiting and General Guillot said "if confirmed" a number of times in your testimony, and the roles that you are going into are so critical for our national defense. But the if confirmed is certainly in question because of Senator Tuberville's holds on these promotions and these positions that I imagine would still be in place. So I think that's important to note here. General Guillot, welcome, and General Whiting, welcome to the hearing here. General Guillot, I believe you grew up in Tucson, Arizona, where Gabby and I live. And we talked about that in my office a couple weeks ago. Like Senator King and many others on this committee, I'm very concerned about transnational criminal organizations and the flow of drugs across the southern border, fentanyl poisoning our communities. Senator King asked about this, but I want to just get down to some resources you think you may need in your new position here. Do you anticipate needing more staffing, more authority, more funding?
Senator, I agree on the severity of the threat and the need for us to use any means available to stop that threat from coming across our border. If I'm confirmed, and when I go down to the southwest border and everywhere from California all the way to Texas and look at each site, things that I'll be looking for not only are what are we doing today, but what could we be doing in terms of ISR, the types of forces that we're using in supporting the lead law enforcement agency. And then if I see anything in terms of numbers, authorities, anything along those lines, or types of help, that's what I will report back to the Secretary of Defense.
All right, thank you. And General, also, you know, related to ISR sort of domain awareness, Senator Budd and I introduced legislation called the SOAR Act. We hope to move this in the FAA reauthorization bill. This is bipartisan legislation that will ensure that these high-altitude balloons that are released rather frequently for scientific purposes and other purposes have transponders so they can be tracked and identified. And it'll take a little bit of the workload off of Northcom. But it'll also allow you to act more quickly to identify any activity that could be a threat if it doesn't have a transponder on it. What could you, as the commander of Northcom, what would you do to further improve domain awareness over the Northcom area of operations?
Senator, the first and I think most important step to improving domain awareness would be to ensure that we have the types of radars and the locations needed to cover all the avenues of approach that are now vulnerable to the homeland, and to ensure that the systems are the types that can detect the new and emerging threats that our competitors are building. Higher speed, all altitude, maneuvering, low radar cross-section types of threats that we can build into a network. And the next important step, Senator, would be to bring all those back to our command center on a single pane of glass that we can not only look at in NORAD and Northcom's headquarters, but share with all the other combatant commands like EUCOM and INDOPACOM, so it's a seamless picture of the threats that we face across all combatant commands.
All right, thank you. And just one comment about the SpaceCom headquarters. So, you know, it's imperative that we get a decision on where SpaceCom is going to be located. I mean, this has gone on too long. These decisions impact our members, their families, local communities. It impacts the mission and the national security of the United States. So we shouldn't let indecision, bureaucracy, and politics impact our national security like this. So especially on a mission set that's as critical as managing the space domain that underpins our defense, and an area where our adversaries are investing heavily in. So, you know, my hope is that we get a resolution on where SpaceCom is going to be headquartered. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Great. Thank you. First, I want to thank both of you for being here. Congratulations on your nominations. Thank you for your service, and I want to thank your families for what they do. I'm sure you guys have moved a lot. Hopefully you've spent a lot of time in Florida. Communist China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and other terrorist groups want to harm the United States at any cost in any way they can. They all possess ballistic missiles and will do anything they can to harm us and our national interest here in the homeland and in space.
So I'm the last one, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, you're worth waiting for.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for waiting, and thank you, all of you, for being here today. It's an important hearing. Secretary Beiser, so I want to begin by talking about PFAS contamination in drinking water. I imagine that may have come up already. And as a member of the group of 11 Republicans and 11 Democrats that worked to negotiate the bipartisan infrastructure law, one of the top priorities, my top priorities here, was dedicated funding for drinking water systems to respond to PFAS contamination. It's a problem in Arizona, but it's also a problem across the country. You know, thanks to our bipartisan law, more than $10 billion is being allocated to drinking water systems across the country to address this contamination. And in the state of Arizona, this funding's already been put to work helping drinking water systems, specifically in the southern part of the state, to install systems to remediate this growing PFAS plume that we see in the groundwater aquifer under where I live and where my wife lives, my granddaughter, who's 2, it's under Tucson. And since the infrastructure law was passed, the EPA has developed new drinking water standards for PFAS, and the new proposed maximum containment level would be 4 parts per trillion instead of the current guidance, which is 70, so much lower. So Secretary Beiser, while the EPA has not yet finalized its drinking water standards, if the proposed levels were finalized, how would that impact our drinking water systems, and how many additional systems in the state of Arizona, as an example, would be required to do this PFAS cleanup?
Senator Kelly, first of all, thank you for your question and thank you for your leadership on this very, very important topic. I can speak to North Carolina's experience with that, and we have 43 of our large municipal and county systems that would not meet the 4 parts per trillion number that you cited as the proposed MCL. I will say, though, broadly speaking, what's needed is, North Carolina got a head start because we had an industrial facility that kind of forced us to be a leader in this area and learn a lot quickly. And so we've had a number of years to do assessments. I think nationwide, states need funding to do assessments to get a handle on where PFAS is. The most cost-effective way to treat it is actually to prevent it from happening in the first place. And so we need funding to see where it's coming from, because the first step is to put down the shovel and stop digging, stop putting it into the environment, and look at how we can better control that piece of it. We also need to get a handle on where we're finding it. And so North Carolina's done extensive testing, both in large water systems, but also in small. We're in the process right now of testing over 650 of our small water systems, which serve mobile home communities, churches, daycares, other sensitive population centers. And so having the funding, having the ability to do that comprehensively is going to help us get our arms around it overall, and also ultimately decrease the amount of treatment costs that we're going to have associated with making sure that our drinking water is safe for public health.
Do you have a sense in North Carolina then how you would have to scale the removal system to get from 70 to 4? Like, how many more systems would you have to add, and what do you think that cost would be?
So since there's not currently a drinking water standard, there had not been a lot of systems that were currently put into place. We do have 2 water systems that are larger that, because of PFAS contamination, that they were higher levels of PFAS contamination coming from the Cape Fear River. They had both put in place, one a reverse osmosis system and another a granular activated carbon system. So those are our 2 examples that we're looking to right now. Based on their experience and the costs associated with the implementation of those systems, we're estimating between $661 million and $1.3 billion for those 43 large water systems to come into compliance to be able to meet the 4 parts per trillion number. That does not include the small water systems that are going to need to put filtration in place. And so we don't have a number there yet, because we're still, results from those tests are starting to roll in, but we don't have a complete picture.
And do you know of any other, are there any future methods to remove PFAS, anything that is being developed, or any innovation out there that could get us to 4 parts per trillion at a potentially a lower cost?
Sure. So the reverse osmosis systems and the granular activated carbon systems are the 2 most commonly and very efficient measures that we have available to us today. I know there's a lot of research and development that's ongoing. I know within our university system, they're looking at potential opportunities, but there are none that are scalable and that I'm aware of that are commercially and available in a widespread fashion yet. But I am encouraged that we have a lot of research and development going. I think we need more research and development, not only on the treatment systems themselves, but also how to assess and treat the spent media associated with those, so that we have the ability to destroy the PFAS and not just perpetuate it within the environment.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stevens, we've been going through a sort of unprecedented period of drought in the West. Worst drought, as far as we can tell, in 1,200 years. It's been going on for 20 years. This summer, rather hot. It's always hot in the desert, but we had unprecedented number of days in Phoenix, especially over 110 degrees. And, we've had wildfires, unprecedented wildfires not only in Arizona, but in other parts of the country and in Canada. These fires have had significant impacts, impacts on communities. And it's been clear to me that we have to leverage every tool at our disposal to mitigate these disasters, but also look for opportunities here to promote forest restoration, which has an impact on these. We have a big ponderosa pine forest in Arizona, biggest in the world, in fact. And we are looking to get this forest restored. So obviously the potential of artificial intelligence here, can't be overstated with its ability to analyze large data sets rather quickly and accurately and to predict things. Cal Fire is conducting a pilot program using AI to help with the early detection of wildfires. So my question to you is twofold. Can you first elaborate on the current initiatives and advancements here with using AI for wildland firefighting, if there is any going on? And then secondly, a little bit about looking ahead to how your laboratory envisions collaborating with other government agencies and the private sector.
Sure. So thank you for that question. So we're quite familiar with the CAL FIRE effort and our colleagues in San Diego who've been very involved in building some of the technology for that. It's a really challenging problem. As you know, fires start with smoke often, and AI trying to detect from cameras on mountaintops and from other vantage points, early examples of fire often get confused by fog or by tractors stirring up dust or something like that. So there's a need to really improve the AI algorithms that are interpreting images, maybe to upgrade the technology so we get both infrared imaging as well as visible light imaging, and really realize it's going to take some time to fully deploy AI and re-engineer how the processes in CAL FIRE and the whole teams will use that AI to be more efficient, right? Ultimately, the AI can put more computer-based eyeballs on the territory than humans could ever look at the monitors and so on. And so I think the long-term impact of AI in firefighting and in disaster management in general is going to be huge. AI can also synthesize and fuse information from remote sensing, from satellites, from on ground, from reports from people texting or tweeting or cameras, and from the workers, firefighters on the ground into a common database that tells us exactly what's going on. And I think that's going to be critically important as we go forward to scale up firefighting efforts. The national labs have been involved in trying to model and simulate fire in the West in particular. Los Alamos has had a very large program for many years trying to build simulations that would predict the likelihood of fires and to be able to understand the amount of flammable material that's accumulating through the forests and so forth. I think all the national laboratories are interested in helping with disaster management. And like the earlier comments about the work at PNNL, the work at Argonne, the work at Los Alamos and Livermore, everybody is really interested in this problem. I think what we need to work out is how we partner between the federal and the state and local that have often the responsibility for this into a structure that really advances both AI, but also takes a practical look at what, we have to try lots of things and not everything's going to work, and then adjust our strategy to focus on what works.
Do you know the specifics of the AI algorithm, and are they trying to incorporate lightning detection into it? Because obviously a lot of forest fires start with lightning, and we know where lightning occurs.
That's right. So we can detect lightning through the EM spectrum, right, through electromagnetic stuff, and overlay that on the geographical maps, and then overlay that with imagery. So I'm quite familiar with how that's being done, but I don't think it's fully integrated yet. I think we could actually do a lot better than we're currently doing.
Yeah, because then you could just narrow the field.
Absolutely. If there's a history of lightning there and you're seeing smoke. Exactly. Precisely.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Senator of my state, and hopefully we can work this out, but I just wanted to get your thoughts because you'll be right in the thick of this as we go along, in the next few months. Hopefully it's not months, hopefully it's just days, but thank you for being here. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to point out and comment on what Senator Tuberville just said. I think the quote was, "There's nobody more military than me." As far as I could tell, there's at least 4 of us, maybe more, that served in the United States military, in some cases for decades, and at least 3 combat veterans. So I take great exception to what Senator Tuberville had to say, and I've heard him say it before, and it just doesn't make any sense. So I wish you would please reevaluate what you think your experience, and just be a little bit more careful about what you say about the United States military. And I'm very happy to defer to Senator
When you've had a
Tuberville.
father die on active duty, you've got a right to say whatever you want. Thank you very much.
No, I don't think that's the case. You have folks here that have served in the United States military, and I think in multiple branches. Mr. Chalet, just returned from a trip to Ukraine last week. This was my second this year, and I feel it's important to be on the ground to understand the issues we're facing. And they're significant. The holds that Senator Tuberville has placed on our military is having an effect with our forces in Ukraine, and it's had an impact. But I want to talk about something else. And, that is the role commercial capabilities have had in Ukraine. And we've seen this with Starlink and others. And, I'm just a little surprised that we got this far and realized that because of a war in Europe that we had a gap in our own capability. And I think that's something we need to consider going forward. And I know there's been a little controversy about the Starlink services in Ukraine. I met with Gwen Shotwell from SpaceX yesterday. The details on this are a little bit complicated, and what's been publicly reported is just not accurate. So looking forward here, it's critical that DoD structures some of its contracts with commercial providers. I'm not specifically talking about SpaceX, to ensure that services that our troops and allies depend upon will be there when they need them. So, Mr. Chalet, I'd like to continue the discussion we had in my office a couple weeks back. If confirmed, what will your approach be to ensuring that future commercial contracts, regardless of the provider and across the department, have the provisions necessary to ensure their services will be there when they need them?
Senator Kelly, thank you for the question, and thank you for the time the other week in your office, and thank you for going a second time to Ukraine. It's very, very important that members of Congress go regularly to Ukraine to see for yourselves what's going on and assess the situation and what we need to do differently. This is an issue that I will be engaged in if confirmed, because Ukraine has been an incubator in many ways of defense innovation, just given the way the Ukrainians have been utilizing the private sector as well as what the United States and others have been providing them. So if confirmed, I would work closely with my colleagues in the acquisition space to see that we're doing what we can to ensure that we're innovating as best we can when it comes to working with the private sector and in getting Ukraine and anyone else the systems that they need to protect themselves.
And Ms. Abercrombie, do you intend, when you're confirmed here, intend to review existing contracts that the department has with our commercial providers to ensure that they meet DoD requirements?
Senator, if confirmed, I think it's absolutely essential that I take a look to make sure, number one, we've baked in an understanding with commercial providers from the outset what the DoD requirements are so that we don't have surprises down the road and we have what we need. And certainly, Senator would commit to making sure we're retroactively looking to ensure we have all the capability we need when we need it.
And Mr. Chalet, do you have any additional concerns about how our adversaries might weaponize commercial services that are available and what we could possibly do to prevent that?
Well, Senator, thanks for the question. I do have concerns looking at it from the outside because it does seem to be an area of vulnerability. If confirmed, it's something I'll look into from the inside and fully understand the scope of the vulnerability and what we can do to get at that.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Mullen, please.
Thank you. To ask that, because I'm going to be waiting around because the conversation's just too good.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jurgen, so we have a few companies in Arizona. One in particular is a business called Urbix that does processing of graphite. And I'm concerned that some of the joint ventures that are currently being formed in some of these free trade jurisdictions with Chinese partners are skirting the intent of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's potentially subsidizing our competitors instead of helping businesses like the one I mentioned. Urbix, who is in Maricopa County, who processes graphite. So Dr. Jurgen, have you seen these joint ventures? Like, what do you know about them, and what impact do you expect that they have on U.S. domestic jobs and U.S. production?
Well, I haven't, studied them in detail, but the fact is that, the reality was that until about 2019, 2020, people just were not paying attention much to this issue at all. And the way the industry developed is globally is with China being a very important, a predominant player. And so I think the reality is that those entities exist. I don't know whether the specific ones are competing with the companies that you're talking about, but this issue of critical minerals is so entangled with our changing relationships with China, and they're not what they were 4 or 5 years ago, and it's not going to get easily untangled at this point. But you can try and continue to shift the balance, which is what the recent legislation is aiming to do.
Yeah, we've heard that, as Urbix and companies like them try to sign contracts, it's often challenging because of, the joint ventures that exist in these free trade jurisdictions. Right. So it does need to be addressed, and we've got to get this back on track. Mr. Compton, so Arizona's leading the way in resource development that's going to help power this clean energy economy for decades. And the first and only mine in the Fast 41 process is a mine called South 32, Hermosa project. It's in Santa Cruz County. And this is the only domestic advanced mine development project that can produce 2 critical minerals, zinc and manganese. So, Mr. Compton, I'm sure many of your members are watching this Fast 41 process closely. And what outcomes do you feel will make the process more appealing to your members?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, actually South 32 and their Hermosa project is a member of ours as well. And so we've been watching that very closely, and as I'm sure many of our members are. We were very pleased to have mining added as a covered sector a couple of years ago. As you note, the Hermosa project is the first one to be on the permitting dashboard. Ultimately, the whole Fast 41 process was implemented to permit large infrastructure projects in a more timely manner. And so that's what we need to see out of this process is expedited permitting, and doing so, by the way, in a way that does not take short shrift to our environmental regulations. And so one of the things for me is if we can do it for these large infrastructure projects without shortchanging our environmental laws and regulations, why can't we do that for all projects? So that's why the process with Fast 41, with more transparency, better agency coordination, it's all things that we need in permitting for all projects. That's why it was frustrating. This came up a little earlier in the hearing that FIPSI last week proposed to now limit the mining projects that would be available under Fast 41 to only those designated as critical mineral projects. I understand the Hermosa project is, and that's great, but we've got an awful lot of projects out there that may not be necessarily deemed critical according to the USGS, but I would submit that the entire periodic table is critical.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now we have Senator Hawley.
From Arizona.
Mr. President, over the weekend, Congress narrowly avoided a government shutdown. It's ridiculous that it got this close. And while we avoided this disaster for now, I'm disappointed that partisan dysfunction prevented Congress from extending U.S. support for Ukraine at such a critical time. As Ukraine continues their counteroffensive and our most recent aid package is drawn down, we must work quickly to get Ukraine more of the weapons and support they need to beat Putin. Because make no mistake, Mr. President, that's what this is about. Whether Vladimir Putin comes out the other side of this emboldened or defeated. Our military leaders have made clear that China and Russia's aggression are the top threats that we face. While President Xi of China watches, Putin has authorized cyber attacks against the United States and proven himself a war criminal, willing to invade his democratic neighbors and intentionally murder women and children and abduct Ukrainian youth from their parents in an effort to recreate the Soviet Empire. So whether Putin is successful in Ukraine has serious implications for U.S. national security. Up to this point, this invasion has been a massive strategic failure for him. He underestimated the courage and the fight of the Ukrainian people to defend their homeland, which I've seen firsthand in Kyiv. He also underestimated the will of the United States and our allies to quickly and effectively support Ukraine. Over the course of the now 20-month war, we have sent Ukraine the equivalent of a small fraction of our yearly defense budget. This has included guns, artillery, ammunition, tanks, missile systems, and more. It's also included the training on how to use and maintain these systems. Now, as it should be, this support has been carefully evaluated and targeted based on what Ukraine needs most on the battlefield. And it's not a blank check, and it's tracked closely. I've seen this myself during 2 visits to Poland and Ukraine. It's also had the impact of allowing us to modernize our own stockpiles. And think about what this support means for our own national security. Russia's massive army is now a shadow of its former self. They've lost thousands of armored vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces. They've lost hundreds of aircraft. They're experiencing the limits of their own power. And they've resorted to forced conscription of their own citizens to fill their ranks. Mr. President, China is watching this, and they're witnessing the staying power and the strength of the coalition that we lead. And Ukraine is on the move, making steady progress in a counteroffensive to take back their country. Russia is losing. Now is not the time to let up. It's time to push forward. A majority of Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate agree. We know that. So while partisan dysfunction got in the way over the weekend, Mr. President, we got to work together to extend the support that Ukraine needs. For the sake of Ukraine's freedom and our own national security, we must get this done, and quickly. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Thank you, Chuck. Senator Rosen and I were here in January, just 10 months ago, and it's really kind of shocking how much has changed. I mean, we were here to sort of celebrate the Abraham Accords,
and all the positive benefits it brings not only to Israel, but Israel's partners in this agreement. And 10 months later, we're back for, I would say, exactly the opposite reason. The meetings we had today were some of the toughest I've had in my 2.5 years in the United States Senate. And some of the images and video that we saw was like I've never seen in my life. And I spent 25 years in the United States Navy, flying in combat over Iraq and Kuwait. I mean, I'm here to say that the United States, has and is going to continue to support and stand by our ally, Israel, as you defend yourself from these barbaric attacks by Hamas. Over the last week, I've been following closely what's been going on here and speaking with many members of the Arizona Jewish community. My wife, Gabby Giffords, is a member of that community. And I bring a message of support from them and from so many Americans who have been deeply affected by these attacks and are thinking about the Israeli people every single day. Now, myself and Senator Rosen were members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and we have worked really hard to get aid for Israel over my time in the Senate, and I know that's true for Senator Rosen as well. But this brings this problem to a whole nother entire level. And we have so much more to do. I understand some of these challenges that Israel is facing operationally, tactically. And there are challenges ahead. I mean, expending a stockpile of interceptors, that is not limitless. I mean, that happened just tonight a couple times as we were in the shelter on the 22nd floor. I will speak to members of Congress one by one, if that's what it takes to get Israel the munitions that you need to defend yourselves. And it's not just about these munitions. I mean, we're sending other support as well. The USS Ford is off the coast in the Med today. I mean, the Hamas terrorist organization is a threat to Israel and all who want peace. And we are going to continue to stand by Israel in its self-defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Cassidy. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Leader Schumer. Thank you, folks, for being here today. As Senator Schumer mentioned, 5 of us went over there. The 3 of us here, Senator Rosen, myself, Senator Schumer, but Senator Cassidy and Romney as well. We spent all day on Sunday, about 13 hours, meeting with the leadership of the Israeli government, the opposition, the war cabinet, the defense minister, President Herzog, as well, the ambassador, our diplomats in Israel. And I got to say, folks, this was kind of unlike any day I've had in my entire career, and I spent 25 years in the Navy. It was heart-wrenching to hear over and over again from the leadership of the Israeli government just the brutality and the heinous acts that Hamas committed against the Jewish people in Israel was it was almost indescribable. And then later to meet with the family members of the American hostages and to hear their stories, tragic stories about their loved ones, and just wanted some reassurance from us that we will do everything in our power to get their family members back, and we will. To a person, all 5 of us stressed to the Israeli leadership the need to have a humanitarian response to this situation. We've already started providing security assistance. Hamas is a terrorist organization and has to be defeated. There is no doubt about that. and we stand with Israel in their goal to eliminate this brutal organization. We've already sent 100,000 metric tons of American diplomacy in the way of the USS Gerald Ford. Another aircraft carrier is going to arrive, the USS Eisenhower, shortly, and a Marine Rapid Response Force is on standby. Israel appreciates what we've done. We did talk in detail about what else we need to do, and that includes security assistance. They have not an immediate need, but soon they will have a need for precision-guided munitions, kits that go on Mark 80 series weapons like the JDAM, and also rounds for interceptor rounds for the Iron Dome system. We personally experienced the benefit of Iron Dome while we were there in Tel Aviv with a couple rocket attacks against Tel Aviv. So we're going to work closely with our other colleagues across the aisle to make sure we continue to stand with our ally, Israel, so they can defend themselves against Hamas. I think it's important to remind everybody that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are not Hamas. Hamas is a terrorist organization that needs to be eliminated. And we stand with Israel, who wants peace. Finally, let me just say one more thing. There are 12 members of CENTCOM, of the United States military, that have not been confirmed by the United States Senate because of one senator, Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama. We need to get these positions confirmed. If CENTCOM is not at its full strength, it hurts Israel and it helps Hamas. Thank you.
Thank you, my three colleagues.
Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Creedon. Senator Kyle, thank you for being here. Ms. Creedon, I want to, well, first of all, thank the Commission and thank both of you for all the hard work it took to put this report together. And I would like to note that the report specifically recommends, and I quote, that the United States prioritize funding and accelerate long-range, non-nuclear precision strike programs to meet the operational need and in greater quantities than currently planned. So I want to highlight that the SM-6, Standard Missile 6, is a U.S.-produced, ship-launched, it's anti-air, it's anti-surface, and it's a weapon that's manufactured in my home state and Senator Kyle's of Arizona. And it's the only weapon in the inventory that can take out a hypersonic missile. The SM-6, it's sort of like 3 missiles in one. It's the only weapon that can perform anti-air, so surface-to-air warfare, ballistic missile defense, and also has a surface-to-surface mission. The Commission's report also notes that the Secretary of Defense needs to direct research, development, test, and evaluation into advanced integrated air and missile defense capabilities, leveraging all domains, including land, air, sea, and space. So based on the capabilities of the SM-6 and your findings in the report, what specific recommendations do you think Congress should prioritize to ensure that the U.S. is prepared to defeat threats from Russia, China, Iran, and any other adversarial regimes that emerge?
Thank you, Senator Kelly. The regional fights, the theater fights, the need to work with our allies, making sure we have missile defense, not just at the national level against ballistic missiles, but having these capabilities to defeat the cruise missiles, to defeat the long-range hypersonics. And then we also have to think about how we think about these things. We need these systems. We need these capabilities for the theaters. Both theaters are, I mean, they're very different, but particularly in the Asia-Pacific theater, given the size of the theater, given that we don't have a NATO alliance, we have great allies, but not together. We need to join with these allies. We need to train with these allies. We need to have co-development programs. We need to have them very integrated to do all of the things that you highlight, to be able to effectively put together regional deterrence, put together regional offense. So research and development is also very important as we think about how we move forward, how we modernize our systems, how we bring in innovation to make sure that we have the necessary capabilities in both theaters. So we fully support all of the work at this, but again, as we said, we didn't pick winners and losers. We have capabilities, and certainly the system, the SM6 is absolutely in this ballpark, in this niche.
And it's not only about the capability and being able to defeat our enemy system, it's also being able to do it at a range that they can't defeat ours. And I've seen this. I was over in Ukraine about a month ago and convened a roundtable of Ukrainian pilots, MiG-29, Su-27 guys, and we talked in detail about this, that how important it is for us to have a capability, a longer stick, let's say, than the Russians have. And in some cases, they do not have that now. And I think in some cases, we find ourselves in the same situation. So it's a matter of just continuing to improve this.
And it goes without saying that the conventional deterrent has to be there, because without the conventional deterrent, we rapidly get to the possibility of introducing the theater nuclear in, which we want to avoid, right? So we need that conventional deterrent so we never get to that nuclear war.
Thank you. And Senator Kyle, it's great to have another Arizona senator here in committee today. I have a question about electronic warfare, but I'm kind of running out of time. But briefly, it's a question about electronic warfare and how integral it is to the Western Pacific, and China is really doubling down on their EW capability. And we have an asset in Arizona that I'm sure you visited a number of times, the Fort Huachuca, the electronic proving ground, and it's a valuable asset, and we've got to. So I'm going to submit this one for the record. And John, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Kelly, I might just note that there are several things in our report that discuss this. General Hinton, one of our commissioners, was very helpful in alerting us to several things that we had to be aware of. And we make some specific recommendations regarding, for example, sale of spectrum, which could adversely affect our ability to deal in this particular realm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No doubt about that. Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and apologize for running a little late. Every summer in Arizona, it's hot. We know that. But this year, the heat wave hit a whole new level. In the month of July, Phoenix had a 31-day streak where the average temperature was above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, 31 days in a row. And in total, we had in Phoenix 55 days above 110 this summer. And that's unprecedented. But one stat that I saw describing this summer's heat stands out above the rest, and I was just looking at a plot. This is a couple months ago, and this is actually a global plot on worldwide temperature. And when you look at the summer of 2023, it kind of stands out. And data from the Copernicus Climate Change Service found that the average global temperature, which is what I'm talking about, when I looked at this, it was a 3 sigma variation, 3 standard deviations away from the norm. And to me, as somebody who used to do a lot of stuff with data as a test pilot, could be a bad data point. Could be. But temperature is a pretty easy thing to measure. So in my view, and in my mind, it's either bad data, which it's not, or something very unusual has happened. That same data shows that in July and August of this year, we were 1.5 degrees centigrade warmer than pre-industrial levels. So Dr. Weiner, when we see data like this,
how easy or difficult is it to attribute all or even part of this to a change in the climate? And when we see data increases like the change in summer temperatures from last year to this one, you know, it's sometimes hard to communicate why this is such a big deal. So how does climate attribution shape the ways that we talk about the impact of climate change on data? If you can address those.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, this year is a particularly unusual one. And Arizona wasn't the only place that had a heat wave. At the same time, we had heat waves in the United States, we had heat waves in Europe and China all simultaneously. And that's part of the reason why so the whole northern hemisphere was hot. And that's part of the reason why the global mean is a 3 sigma event. Now, some of that is going to be an El Nino effect, and we can quantify that, but not nearly all of it. And so some also, part of it is quite clearly the anthropogenic effect, the human-caused effect from our consumption of fossil fuels and our changes to the composition of the atmosphere.
Dr. Wader, can I just ask you, if you go back decades or over the last 100 years, has there been another 3 sigma event in temperature?
Not that I'm aware of, but my knowledge isn't complete on that. So it's an unusual event. You know, this is, when I was coaching ice hockey, I would call this, in the words of the great basketball coach John Wooden, a teachable moment. This is a teachable moment for many of us, including climate scientists, so that we can better understand that. And attribution science is probably the key to understanding how all these different factors led to this 3 sigma event.
So part of it could be El Nino.
Some of it certainly is called El Nino. Some of it could be natural.
But we've had El Ninos.
We've had El Ninos in the past, of course.
What's the cycle on an El Nino?
It's every 4 to 7 years.
4 to 7.
But, you know, 1998 was another huge El Nino year, and then years afterwards were cooler. And I had to write papers afterwards saying, you know, the title of the paper is the climate warming or cooling? And it's because people were saying, well, climate change stopped. And so it's important to look, that's wrong, of course. You know, you can't just start your analysis in the hottest time of the year or hottest data point. And so...
Yeah, the CO2, methane, carbon monoxide just didn't vanish from the atmosphere.
No. And so the longer the data records, the more informative it is.
And do you expect future 3 sigma events to occur more frequently?
That I cannot say. I don't think we understand changes in variability nearly as well as we do changes in the average. But I certainly can tell you that this summer event, you know, throughout the world was unusual, but it will be the norm in a very short period of time.
And do you feel that the messaging in the United States and across the planet on this issue and this 3 sigma event is sufficient? Or do you feel like maybe media and others are falling short?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. To me, the data always speaks for itself, but I'm not an expert on media relations, and so I think I'll defer on that question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't, you know, when I saw the data, it was just happened, I was reading, you know, an article and just saw the plot, and it was like, you know, my reaction was, wow, that's different.
One of the things one of my colleagues and I are working on is, would this temperature been impossible without climate change? Would this past summer been impossible without climate change? And, you know, give me a few more months and we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, please let me know. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, we are in complex and dangerous times. Ukraine is fighting off a Russian invasion. Israel is defending itself against Hamas. American soldiers have been attacked by Iran's proxies. China is watching closely and testing the United States and our allies. We need our military to be stronger and more focused than ever. However, because of one senator, our military is being severely hamstrung. The senator from Alabama, Mr. Tuberville, has a policy disagreement with the Pentagon. However, instead of addressing this policy, he decided to single-handedly shut down what has historically been a bipartisan process to promptly confirm military nominees. My Republican colleagues made this very clear last night. His decision isn't affecting just a handful of positions. He is currently blocking 367 admirals and generals, and that number continues to grow. That's left members of our armed forces stranded, unable to get the promotions they've earned. It has put their lives and the lives of their family members on hold. Today, we will vote to confirm 3 of them: the Chief of Naval Operations, Air Force Chief of Staff, and the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. That's the top officers in the Navy and the Air Force and the number 2 officer in the United States Marine Corps. Now, that may seem like progress. The senator from Alabama may say that this is an example of how the Senate can confirm military nominees one by one. But here's the thing. The new leaders of the Air Force and the Navy won't have anyone confirmed as their number 2. So they will have to do 2 of the highest-ranking jobs in their service at the same time: their new job and their old job. That's because of Senator Tuberville. With hundreds of admirals and generals awaiting promotion because of his holds, it's impossible for the Senate to catch up doing this one by one. In the Marine Corps, the situation is even more serious. Over the weekend, we learned the terrible news that General Eric Smith, confirmed just last month to lead the United States Marine Corps, suffered a medical emergency. General Smith was in the same position, forced to do 2 jobs at once. Today, we will confirm his deputy, who will have to immediately step up to be the acting commandant of the Marine Corps as long as General Smith is recovering. It's an outrage that it takes an urgent vote of the U.S. Senate to fill a leadership gap at the top of the U.S. Marine Corps. That's the result of this blockade. And it's what we risk across our military leadership if, God forbid, another service chief has to step away from their job. The senator from Alabama doesn't think this does real damage to our military readiness. He either doesn't know what he's talking about or he doesn't care. At this very minute, the brave men and women of the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit are aboard the USS Bataan, the USS Carter Hall, and the USS Mesa Verde just south of Israel in the Red Sea. This is our quick reaction force, trained to evacuate civilians in conflict zones. Those Marines are in a dangerous part of the world at a dangerous time, prepared to do a very dangerous job. They deserve fully staffed and focused senior leadership, able to advise the president while also giving the best guidance to their commanders. For 4 days this week, within arm's reach of a war, they didn't have it because of one senator. The solution is clear, and it's been clear since day one. The senator from Alabama must remove his hold on our admirals and generals. We wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for him. And he can stop this today if he wants to. If he continues to refuse, it's just too dangerous to wait for him to do the right thing. There is a proposal for the Senate to take a temporary change that will allow us to vote on the bulk of these nominees at once. It's designed to put our national security ahead of all else by addressing the dangerous circumstance these holds have put our military in. Now, I've talked with many of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, about this fact, and I encourage everyone to give it serious thought. At what George Will called the most dangerous U.S. moment since World War II, the Senate must consider whether it will allow the U.S. military to be without hundreds of confirmed admirals and generals, and to be just one illness or accident away from once again having a service branch without senior leadership. Because to me, Mr. President, that is a pretty clear choice. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Warren. Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for the video that you showed at the top of the hearing that told the story of Jennifer DeStefano. Jennifer is a mom of 4 from Scottsdale, and as I think we heard earlier this year, she got a call from an unknown number, and when she picked it up, it was her 15-year-old daughter. Her daughter was crying and calling out for her. A man got on the phone and threatened to harm her kid unless she paid $50,000. The man said he needed the money in cash and would be coming to her in a van. And folks nearby called 911 as well as calling Jennifer's husband. Turned out that her daughter was just at home, not with kidnappers. And the call wasn't real. Scammers had used, in this case, AI to create a voice that sounded like her daughter's voice, and she couldn't tell the difference. And even though in that moment of extreme, horrific, terror probably shook Jennifer to her core, the police said there was nothing that they could do. No money was transferred. No crime, they said, had been committed. Now, this feels to me, and I imagine many others, and to many Americans, as a huge blind spot in the law. I think we have a couple lawyers on the panel here, so for Mr. Schildhorn and Mr. Wiseman, how should we in Congress be looking at filling these gaps in the law?
Thank you, Senator. As I think you've just mentioned it as part of your question, it is a fundamental principle of our system that there is a remedy if you're harmed. And with crypto and AI, the law enforcement does not have a remedy, and neither does the judicial system. You can't find anyone to sue. So my answer is that there needs to be some legislation that allows these people to be identified, or where the money has gone to be identified, so that there's a remedy for the harm that's being caused. Currently, there's a hole in the system. There is no remedy that I'm aware of.
Well, how about of the issue that in this specific case, and by the way, I've had this, this happened to somebody I'm rather close with, almost the exact same thing. And again, no money was transferred. But it was incredibly, shocking to, in this case, it was a grandparent that had the same issue. Same thing happened to them with a grandkid. No money was transferred. To me, that still seems like a crime, attempting to rip somebody off, even though they weren't successful. Do you feel we should make that a crime and their criminal penalties?
Well, Senator Kelly, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm a lawyer, so that's never stopped me from giving an opinion. So in this instance, I mean, there are analogies in the law to intentional infliction of emotional distress. I believe that's a cause of action in many states. So there might be a way to enhance that type of law, that if someone's using this, even if you don't spend money and you cause that kind of shock and distress, that the law allows you to recover a sum of money that's not calculated by how much you've actually lost, but how much pain and suffering you've incurred because you've been subject to that type of extortion.
Mr. Wiseman?
Yeah, and I think Gary hit on the key word there. Extortion is a crime. Attempted extortion is a crime. I do think it already is a criminal violation, but I agree with you. I think that some federal legislation to this particular medium of delivery of this extortion could be done. The other thing is, one thing I tell my students when we're talking about white-collar crime, the answer to every question is, it's about the money. And so here, as been said before, it's very difficult to trace it. They're using burner phones. Who knows even where they may be? They may be even using voice cloning technology. They can be in a foreign country where their accents are no longer going to be able to be heard. But what we can do is, as the Senior Safe Act is, go after gift cards because they pay by gift cards. Go after the wiring. Go after the banking. So you stop it there where people, they're in the rush of emotion. Then they go to pay by a gift card, and the gift card people say, where's this going? What's this for? And they recognize the scam. So stop it before it actually occurs.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'm going to submit a couple questions for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. We'll turn next to Senator Gillibrand.